course, Saudi Arabia is right in there. But I wanted to get into this and let you guys see some of the stuff that's going on, hear some of the stuff that's going on, and you guys, like I said, the number is up at the top, right there, and you can always call in and join live. The lines are open. If you go in, you'll be put into like on hold in a waiting room until I answer it. But I'm going to get over here to the first article. So this article here, let's take that off there. Alright, so this article says the road to Damascus, how the Syria war was won. This article came out today and is from Strategic Culture. But it says, following the Damascus Kurdish alliance, Syria may become the biggest defeat for the Central Intelligence Agency since Vietnam, says Pepe Escobar. It says, what is happening in Syria following yet another Russia brokered deal is a massive geopolitical game changer. I've tried to summarize it in a single paragraph this way. It's a quadruple win. The U.S. performs a face-saving withdrawal, which Trump can sell as avoiding a conflict with NATO ally Turkey. And Turkey has the guarantee by the Russians that the Syrian army will be in control of the Turkish-Syrian border. Russia prevents a war escalation and keeps the Russia-Iran-Turkey peace process alive, and Syria will eventually regain control of the entire northeast. Syria may be the biggest defeat for the CIA since Vietnam, yet that hardly begins to tell the whole story. Allow me to briefly sketch in broad historical strokes how we got here. It began with an intuition I felt last month in the tri-border point of Lebanon, Syria, and the occupied Palestine, followed by a subsequent series of conversations in Beirut with first-class Lebanese, Syrian, and Iranian, Russian, French, and Italian analysts, all resting on my travels in Syria since the 1990s. With a mix of selected bibliography in French available at Antone's in Beirut thrown in. The Vilayets. So let's start in the 19th century, when Syria consisted of 6 vilayets, Ottoman province, without counting Mount Lebanon, which had a special status since 1861 to benefit the Morite Christian in Jerusalem, which was Sanjak administrative division of Istanbul. The vilayets did not define the extreme complex Syrian identity. For instance, Armenians were the majority in the vilayet of Maras, Kurds in Diyarbakir, both now part of Turkey and southern Anatolia. And the vilayets of Aleppo and Damascus were both Sunni Arab. The 19th century Ottoman Syria was the epitome of the cosmopolitan. There were no interior borders or walls, and everything was interdependent. So you can take a look at the map here. It says ethnic groups in the Balkans and Asia Minor, early 20th century, historical atlas in 1911. The Europeans profiting from the World War I intervened. France got the Syrian Lebanese littoral, and later the vilayets of Maras, Mosul, today Iraq. Palestine was separated from Sham, the Levant, to be internationalized. The vilayet of Damascus was cut in half. French got the north, the Brits got the south. Separation between Syria and the mostly Christian Lebanese lands came later. There was always the complex question of the Syria-Iraq border since antiquity. The Euphrates acted as a barrier, for instance, between the Sham and the Umayyads and their fierce competitors on other side of the river, the Mesopotamian Abbasids, James Barr, and Splendid, a line in the sand. Notes correctly that the Skytes-Picot agreements imposed on the Middle East the European conception of territory, their line in the sand codified and delimited separation between nation states. The problem is there were no nation states in the region in the early 20th century. The birth of Syria, as known, was the work in progress involving the Europeans. The Hashemite dynasty nationalist Syrians invested in building a greater Syria including Lebanon and the Maronites of Mount Lebanon. And an important factor is that few in the region lamented losing independence as Hashemite media and except the Turks. The loss of the vilayet of Mosul in what became Iraq after World War I. In 1925, Sunnis became the de facto prominent power in Syria as the French unified Aleppo and Damascus. During the 1920s, French also established the borders of eastern Syria in the Treaty of Lausanne. In 1923, forced the Turks to give up all Ottoman holdings but didn't keep out of the game. Here's a picture of that, Turkish borders according to the Treaty of Lausanne in 1923. Says the Turks soon started to encroach on the French mandate and began blocking the dream of Kurdish autonomy. French in the end gave in the Turkish-Syrian border, which would parallel the route of the fabled Baghdad-Ban, the Berlin-Baghdad Railway. In the 1930s, France gave in even more in the Sanjak de Alexandria, today's Ikinsterin, in Hatay province, Turkey. It was finally annexed by Turkey in 1939, when only 40% of the population was Turkish. The annexation led to the exile of tens of thousands of Armenians. It was a tremendous blow for the Syrian nationalists and was a disaster for Aleppo, which lost its corridor to the eastern Mediterranean. This picture is the Turkish forces entered Alexandretta on July 5, 1938. The emergent Syria, out of conflicting Turkish, French, British, and myriad local interests, obviously could not and did not please any community. Still, the heart of the nation configured what was described as useful Syria. No less than 60% of the nation was and remains practically void. Yet geopolitically, that translates into strategic depth. The heart of the matter is current war. To the eastern steppes, Syria was all about Bedouin tribes. To the north, it was all about the Turkish-Kurdish clash. And to the south, the border was a mirage in the desert, only drawn with Advent and Transjordan. Only the western front with Lebanon was established and consolidated after World War II. The Hafez Bashar. Starting in 1963, the Ba'ath Party, secular and nationalist, took over Syria, finally consolidating its power in 1970 with the Hafez al-Assad, who, instead of just relying on the Alawite majority, built a humongous hyper-centralized state machinery fixed on the police state. The key actor who refused to play the game were the Muslim Brotherhood. So you're seeing how far this goes back. All the way being massacred during the hardcore 1982 Hama repression. Secularism in the police state, that was the fragile Syrian mosaic, was perverse, but already in the 1970s, major fractures were emerging between major cities and very poor periphery, between the useful West and the Bedouin East, between Arabs and Kurds. But the urban elites never repudiated the iron will of Damascus. Cronyism, after all, was quite profitable. Damascus interfered heavily with the Lebanese Civil War in 1976 at the invitation of the Arab League as a peacemaking force. In Hafez al-Assad logic, stressing the Arab identity of Lebanon was essential to recover Greater Syria, but Syrian control over Lebanon started to unravel in 2005 after the murder of former Lebanese Prime Minister Rafik Hariri, very close to Saudi Arabia, and the Syrian Arab army eventually left. Bashar al-Assad had taken power in 2000. Unlike his father, he bet on the Alawites to run the state machinery preventing the possibility of a coup, but completely alienating himself from the poor Syrian on the street. What the West defined as the Arab Spring began in Syria in March 2011. It was a revolt against Alawites as much as a revolt against Damascus, totally instrumentalized by the foreign interest, and the revolt sprang up in extremely poor, dejected Sunni paraphrase, Dara in the south, the deserted east, and the suburbs of Damascus and Aleppo. This picture of a protest in Damascus in April 24, 2011. What was not understood in the West was that Beggar's Banquet was not against the Syrian nation, but against the regime. Jabhat al-Nusra, in a PR exercise, even broke its official link with Al-Qaeda and changed its denomination to Fatah al-Sham, and then Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, Organization of the Liberation of Levant. Only ISIS or Daesh said they were fighting for the end of the Skytes peacoat. By 2014, the perpetually moving battlefield was more or less established. Damascus against both Jafat and al-Nusra and the ISIS-Daesh, with a wobbly role in the Kurds in the northeast, oppressed and persevering the cantons of Afrin, Kobane, and Kamishli. But the key point is that the combat group, Kadbita group, each neighborhood, each village, and in fact each combatant was in and out of allegiances non-stop. That yielded a dizzying nebule of jihadist criminals, mercenaries, some linked to Al-Qaeda, some to Daesh, some trained by the Americans, and some just making a quick buck. For instance, Salafists, lavishly financed by Saudi Arabia and Kuwait, especially Jaish al-Islam, even struck alliances with the PYD Kurds in Syria and the jihads of Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, the remixed 30,000 strong Al-Qaeda in Syria. Meanwhile, the PYD Kurds and the emanation of the Turkish Kurds, PKK, which Ankara considered terrorists, profited from this unholy mess, plus a deliberate ambiguity by Damascus to try to create their own autonomous Rojava. This is a demonstration in the city of Afrin to support the YPG against the Turkish invasion of Afrin. This happened in 2018. So that Turkish strategic depth. Turkey was all in, turbocharged by neo-Ottoman politics of former Foreign Minister Ahmet Davutoglu. The logic was to reconquer parts of the Ottoman Empire and get rid of Assad because he had helped PKK Kurdish rebels in Turkey. His strategic depth, published in 2001, had been a smash hit in Turkey, reclaiming the glory of 8 centuries of a sprawling empire compared to a puny 11 kilometers of borders fixed by the French and the Kemalists. Balad al-Kham, the Ottoman province congregating Lebanon, historical Palestine, Jordan, and Syria, remained a powerful magnet in both Syria and Turkish unconsciousness. No wonder Turkey's recap Erdogan was fired up. In 2012, he even boasted he was getting ready to pray in the Umayyad Mosque in Damascus post-regime change. Of course, he has been gunning for the safe zone inside Syrian border, actually a Turkish enclave, since 2014. To get it, he has used a whole bag of nasty players, from militias close to the Muslim Brotherhood to hardcore Turkmen gangs. With the establishment of the Free Syrian Army, the FSA, for the first time Turkey allowed foreign weaponized groups to operate in its own territory. A training camp was set up in 2001 in the Sanjukov Alexandria. The Syrian National Council was also created in Istanbul. A bunch of non-entities with the dysphoria who had not been in Syria for decades. Ankara enabled a de facto jihad highway with people from Central Asia, Caucasus, Maribid, Pakistan, Xinjiang, and all points north of Europe began smuggling back and forth at will. In 2015, Ankara and Doha set up the dreaded Army of Conquest, which included Al-Qaeda. So at the same time, the Ankara maintained an extremely ambiguous relationship with ISIS and Daesh, buying, smuggling oil, treating jihads in Turkish hospitals, paying zero attention to jihad intel collected and developed on Turkish territory. For at least 5 years, the MIT Turkish intelligence provided political and logistic background to the Syrian opposition while weaponizing a galaxy of Salafists. After all, Ankara believed that ISIS or Daesh only existed because of the evil deployed by the Assad regime. And this is how Russia steps in. So this is Russian President Vladimir Putin is meeting with President of Turkey, Recep Erdogan. So the first major game changer was a spectacular Russian entrance into the summer of 2015. Vladimir Putin had asked the U.S. to join the fight against the Islamic State as the Soviet Union allied against Hitler, negating the American idea that this was Russia's bid to restore its imperial glory. But the American plan instead, under Barack Obama, was single-minded, betting on a ragtag Syrian Democratic Forces, the SDF, a mix of Kurds and Sunni Arabs supported by the air power of the U.S. Special Forces, north of the Euphrates to smash ISIS all the way to Raqqa and Deir ez-Zor. Rocket-bombed a rebel by the Pentagon may have been taken by the SDF by Desir. It was taken by Damascus Syrian Arab Army. The ultimate American aim was to consequently keep the north of the Euphrates under U.S. power via the proxies, the SDF and the Kurdish PYD, YPG. That American dream is now over, laminated by the imperial Democrats and Republicans alike. The CIA will be after Trump's scalp till kingdom come. So the Kurdish dream over. It says, talk about a cultural misunderstanding. As much as the Syrian Kurds believe U.S. protection was amounted to an endorsement of their independence dreams, America's never seemed to understand that throughout the greater Middle East you cannot buy a tribe at best, you can rent them, and they use you according to their interest. I've seen it from Afghanistan to Iraq's Anbar Providence. The Kurdish dream of contiguous autonomous territory from Kamchali to Mawij is over. Sunni Arabs living in the perimeter will resist any Kurdish attempts at dominance. The Syrian PYD was founded in 2005 by PKK militants. In 2011, Syrians from the PKK came from Kandil, the PKK base in northern Iraq, to build the YPG militia. The PYD is predominantly Arab zoned. Syrian Kurds are in charge of governing because for them Arabs are seen as a bunch of barbarians incapable of building their democratic, socialist, ecological, and multi-communitarian society. Says, one can imagine how conservative Sunni Arabs tribal leaders hate their guts. There is no way these tribal leaders will ever support the Kurds against the SAA for the Turkish army. After all, these Arab tribal leaders spent a lot of time in Damascus seeking support from Bashar al-Assad, and now the Kurds themselves have accepted that support in the face of the Turkish incursion, green-lighted by Trump. East of the Deir ez-Zor, the PYD and the YPG already had to say goodbye to the region that is responsible for 50% of the Syrian oil production. Damascus and the SAA now have the upper hand. What's left for the PYD and the YPG is to resign themselves to Damascus and Russian protection against Turkey and the chance of exercising sovereignty in exclusively Kurdish territories. So the ignorance of the West. I'm almost done here, but this is basically setting the foundation for the rest of what I'm about to get into. So the ignorance of the West. The West, with typical Orientalist haughtiness, never understood that Alawites, Christians, Ismailis, and Druids in the Syrian would always privilege Damascus for protecting compared to its opposition, monopolized by hardcore Islamicists, if not jihads. The West also did not understand that the government in Damascus for survival could always count on formidable Ba'ath Party networks plus the dreaded intel services. So rebuilding Syria. The reconstruction of Syria may cost as much as $200 billion. Damascus has already been made very clear that the U.S. and the EU are not welcome. China will be the forefront along with Russia and Iran. This will be a project strictly followed by the Eurasia integration playbook, with the Chinese aiming to revive Syria's strategic positioning in an ancient Silk Road. As for Erdogan, distrusted by virtually everyone and a tad less neo-Ottoman than the recent past, he now seems to have finally understood that Bashar al-Assad won't go, and he must live with it. Ankara is bound to remain involved with Tehran and Moscow in finding comprehensive constitutional solution for Syrian tragedy through the former Astan process, later developed by the Ankara. The war may not have been totally won, of course, but against all odds it is clear and unified. Sovereign Syrian nations is bound to prevail over every perverted strand of geopolitical Molotov cocktails concocted in sinister NATO GCC labs. History will eventually tell us that, as an example to the whole global structure, this will remain the ultimate game changer. So, I played that, or I read that, because now I'm going to go into this thing. This video is titled "What Trump's Syria Withdrawal Means for the Kurds, Russia, and American Allies." So I'm going to play this for you guys. I'm not going to show the video because I don't want to get copyright infringement and stuff like that, but they're going to go into it and talk about it a little bit, and then I'm going to share some more articles that have to do with Japan and Syria and what happened when Pompeo went over to visit Bibi or Benjamin Netanyahu. So I'm going to let this play just to build up a little bit more of a foundation for you guys.
We return now to the volatile situation on the Syrian-Turkish border, where an American effort over the past 5 years devolved into new violence just in the last few days. Nick Schifrin is back with that.
Thanks, Judy. So what do the latest developments in the fluid situation in Syria and the Middle East mean? For that, we get two views from two longtime Syria watchers. Ted Kattouf was a career diplomat and served as ambassador to Syria under President George W. Bush. He's now president of Amid East, which promotes mutual understanding of the Middle East. And Joshua Landis is the director of the Center for Middle East Studies at the University of Oklahoma and runs the blog SyriaComment.com. Thanks very much to you both. Ambassador Kattouf, let me start with you. The developments in the last few days, Turkish forces, Turkish aligned forces moving south into northern Syria. Syrian government forces moving north, now allied with former U.S. partners, Syrian Kurds. How does that affect U.S. stated goals in Syria, including the enduring defeat of ISIS and starting a political process?
Well, I remember that President Obama was severely criticized for pulling out of Iraq in 2011, and many people said that that pull out of U.S. troops led to the rise of ISIS, although some have said it would have happened anyway, had we stayed or not. But clearly there is a clear link between what has just happened and the potential for ISIS to reassert itself in various parts of Syria. And also, besides Kurdish clashes going on right now, with the Turks clearly having the upper hand over a militia group, we also have the potential for Syrian-Turkish fighting going on. The Turkish army, I believe, is much stronger than Syria's war-weary units, but you have Iran in the mix, you have Russia in the mix. It's a real, we've opened a Pandora's box.
Joshua Landis, wasn't that Pandora's box open long ago when this civil war started? And President Trump has talked about how the U.S. should not be in forever wars. Do you think he has a point?
He absolutely has a point. Of course, the execution has been very ham-fisted. and I agree with Ted on that. But the notion of pulling out of Syria is I think, well made, and there's no good way to pull out of Syria. The real mistake was getting into Iraq and invading Iraq and turning over the apple cart in this region to begin with. But, you know, Americans don't see any benefit coming out of these wars. And it's now $5 trillion, according to some estimates, that have been spent in the Middle East over the last 20 years. You know, I am sitting here at the University of Oklahoma in Oklahoma City, and people are fed up. They want better roads. They're wondering why their schools aren't as good as they should be. And they wonder where the money has gone. In some ways, the elite in Washington, the foreign policy establishment, has become dissociated from the average American. And Trump is exploiting that. He's going to use it in order to try to, I think, you know, obviously try to win the elections. And this is what he ran on last time, and he's going to run on it again.
Ambassador Katouf, the Trump administration also makes another point, which is that Turkey has been a NATO ally since 1952, has fought in every war alongside the U.S. since then, and the Kurds were simply a partner, a temporary one at that, to help fight ISIS. So do those arguments have a point? Do the Turks have legitimate security interests?
The Turks have legitimate security interests, and I also want to say I don't disagree with Joshua Landis that eventually we need to get out of these areas, get our troops out. But it's how it's done, the implementation, the impulse of the president talking to Erdogan and then just telling the Pentagon and the National Security Council, pull our troops back, leaving the Kurds totally exposed. And by the way, this is not the first time we've betrayed the Kurds. You could go back to the San Remo conference of 1923, and if you want to look for original sins, that might be it, because 20 million Kurds have been left out of having their nation state of their own, and they're divided among 4 countries in that region. But this is a terrible betrayal, and our allies will not, our other allies will not fail to notice.
Joshua Landis, I want to move to something that we've seen in the last few hours this afternoon. President Trump has imposed sanctions on Turkey, and he's used language also that went even further than he did before. He talked about how the Turkish incursion precipitating a humanitarian crisis and setting the conditions for possible war crimes. The vice president just came out a few minutes ago calling for a ceasefire and negotiations. Will this change Turkish behavior?
You know, Turkey, unfortunately, this has been so badly handled that you would think that if you're going to sell out the Kurds to Turkey, that you would get something in exchange. Perhaps that Turkey would move closer to the United States, would get rid of its Russian missiles that it just bought. And but that hasn't happened. And now the United States looks like it could be moving into a situation where it's putting sanctions on Turkey, it's thrown the Kurds under the bus, and you wonder, what are we coming away with? Very little.
Ambassador Katouf, on what happens next, you mentioned before there could be some confrontation between Turkey and Syria. How serious would that be?
It would be very serious, but I think Russia is going to play a very important role in all of this. Russia does not want to have to get its troops involved in defending Syria against Turkey. They're going to be talking to both sides. Both sides are going to listen to Russia. Erdogan is not going to be intimidated right now by sanctions because he wants a cordon sanitaire, and it won't take him forever
he wants
to
a
get
buffer
that
zone
done.
right along that border.
Exactly.
And he's going to continue to do that, you think?
He will.
Joshua Landis, we just heard Ambassador Katouf mention Russia. What is the state of Russian influence in Syria, and how does that compare to U.S. influence right now?
Well, Putin's stock has gone up to the skies now, and Trump has collapsed in terms of Middle East. We see Putin has gone to Saudi Arabia today. First time a Russian president has gone to Saudi Arabia in over a decade, and he has he's getting the royal treatment. Everywhere we see Middle Eastern countries turning to Russia. Israel has established close relations with Russia, so has Saudi Arabia. Iran, of course, is an ally. Syria, Turkey is an ally. So Russia, Putin in many ways is the man of the hour. He's become the statesman who can talk to everybody. Everybody's looking to him to help to attenuate the conflicts that seem to be multiplying in the Middle East. This is a bad moment for the United States. Trying to get out of the Middle East the way it has been has caused many people to distrust the United States and to wonder, are they an ally that will come to my aid in our time of need?
So that was a little article on, or a little snippet about what's going on as of, this past week with Turkey and Russia and Syria. So this article says Trump says Europe now willing to take IS prisoners in Syria. This is breaking news. And this came out yesterday, so we all know that he was saying that he wasn't going to take any, and he was going to dump them back over in the Middle East, and he was going to get rid of them again and just release them over into Europe, where a lot of them came from, and then they could deal with it after that. Well, seems he's changed his mind once again. Could deal with it after. So this is from the Associated Press. This is claiming new progress against the Islamic State extremists in Syria. President Donald Trump said Friday that some European nations are now willing to take responsibility for detained IS fighters who are from other countries. Anyway, big progress being made, he exclaimed on Twitter. A day earlier, he had proclaimed that the U.S. brokered ceasefire deal with Turkey marked a great day for civilization, though the deal's effect was largely to mitigate a foreign policy crisis widely seen to be of his own making. At the Pentagon, Defense Secretary Mark Esper said the U.S. troops are continuing their withdrawal from northern Syria. He also said no U.S. troops will participate in enforcing or monitoring the ceasefire that Vice President Mike Pence announced Thursday in Ankara. So the force protection of our service members remains our top priority, and as always, the U.S. forces will defend themselves from any threat as we complete our withdrawal from the area, Esper told reporters. In a series of tweets, Trump said that he had spoken Friday to Turkish President Recep Erdogan amid reports that fighting actually had not ended. And this is what we were going to get into, because they said that there was a ceasefire, and from what I'm reading, that's not what's going on. And then I watched another video that Erdogan said that after the ceasefire, then they would go even further force in Syria against the Kurds. So inevitably, just leaving them time to shell a little bit and then build up their forces more, ceasefires over, and cause a bombardment over there. So he told me there was minor sniper and mortar fire that was quickly eliminated. Trump tweeted, adding that there is a goodwill on both sides, he said. The U.S. has secured the oil, and ISIS fighters are double secured by Kurds in Turkey. Later in comments to reporters, Trump again spoke of taking oil. We've taken control of the oil in the Middle East, he said. White House officials had no immediate explanation for the comment, which seemed disconnected from any developments in Syria or elsewhere in the Middle East. And here we are, players playing a game over commodities. But that's just my 2 cents. Officials said a number of ISIS fighters, likely just over 100, have escaped custody since Turkey launched its invasion within last week. Of course they did. Trump said nothing further about the European nations. He contended he had agreed to take some of the IS fighters. After hours of negotiation in Ankara, the two nations Thursday agreed to a 5-day ceasefire. So it's 5-day ceasefire in the Turks' deadly attacks on Kurdish fighters in the northern Syria. But some fighting continued early Friday in northeast Syrian border town. The Kurds were U.S. allies in the fight against the Islamic State group, but came under assault after Trump ordered U.S. troops to leave the area earlier this month. The agreement requires the Kurds to vacate a swath of territory in Syria along the Kurdish border, an arrangement that largely solidifies Turkey's position and aims in the week-long conflict. Pence reached out the deal with Erdogan, hailed the agreement as the way to end the bloodshed caused by the Turkey invasion. So this basically just goes back and forth, talks about the conflict between everybody here. So this is basically what we're headed for. So this is from CNN, and I know some of you guys will ask, why am I reading CNN? I get news from everywhere, and then I kind of, make up my mind about what's going on from watching this stuff. So this says a clash continued on the border between Turkey and Syria on Friday, according to eyewitnesses and Kurdish fighters, despite U.S. Vice President Mike Pence's announcement that he and Turkish President Erdogan had brokered a 5-day ceasefire there. So the shelling and artillery, like I said earlier, a fire was reported Friday on the border town, and one of the targets of Turkey's week-old offensive against the Kurdish fighters, who have long been attacked by the United States. So here's a map of it. I don't know how well you guys can see that, but so government forces in the gray, the U.S. allied Kurdish forces in the green, the Turkish army and Syrian rebels are in the orange up here at the top, and the Syrian opposition is in the blue. So we get into this because, like I said, all of these guys go in with all of these guys, and the main one that's getting it kicked off right now is Turkey. And if you notice, they've set back for a very long time. They haven't done anything, and then for the past 10 years, I've said this before, you can get to my Facebook post, for the past 10 years I've said that they are going to be predominant in whatever is going to happen over in the Middle East. They are a largely Muslim influenced country. There's interest over in Istanbul from certain people within our government, towers if you will, that are being profited off of, and I'm not going to go any further than that, but you guys can look into that. I'm going to just say look into that, and you're going to find out there's properties there, not necessarily owned, but profited from individuals within our own government in Istanbul. His name's on the building, so you can look that up. But anyway, so you have Russia and Turkey, two predominant ones, and then Saudi Arabia and Iraq and all this, and Israel's right in the middle, so they're being surrounded. All this is biblical, what is happening. So this says, Pompeo seeks to reassure Israel amid Syrian turmoil. Well, as you know, that Prime Minister Netanyahu and the other guy that he was running against kind of got in a stalemate, and they're trying to work their government out right now. Although Bibi was, given reins to kind of form the government over there with the other guy. So, old Mr. ex-CIA Director Pompeo. U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo met with the Israeli Prime Minister on Friday to reaffirm the country's close ties at a time when many of Israel fear the Trump administration intends to cut and run from the Middle East. The meeting came a day after U.S. delegation led by Vice President Mike Pence and Pompeo reached an agreement with Turkey to halt its week-old offense against the Kurdish forces in northern Syria. Turkey invaded where were they at? Turkey invaded after the U.S. moved its troops aside, abandoning the Syrian Kurdish fighters America had partnered with against the Islamic State group. Turkey views the Kurdish fighters as terrorists because of their links to an insurgency inside the borders. Israel has strongly condemned the offensive, with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu warning of ethnic cleansing, and others have expressed fear that President Donald Trump's stated desire to get out of the stupid endless wars in the Middle East makes him an unreliable ally as Israel faces threats from Iran. So in brief remarks after their meeting, Pompeo said the remarkable close relationship between our two countries is as strong as it's ever been. He said they discussed ways to push back against Iran and efforts to jointly combat all the challenges that the world confronts here in the Middle East. Netanyahu thanked America for its consistent support and said they discussed ways of making the alliance even stronger. When asked about the agreement to halt fighting in northern Syria, Netanyahu said, "We hope things will turn out for the best." Without elaborating, Pompeo declined to comment. Later, Pompeo met with the officials from the Simon Winsteel Center, which works to combat anti-Semitism worldwide. The center said the representatives had shared with Pompeo the fears of millions of Americans over the plight of the Kurdish minority in Syria. They said Pompeo assured them the United States was not abandoning the Middle East. Netanyahu has portrayed his close relationship with Trump as a godsend for Israel, pointing to the American president's decision to withdraw from Iranian nuclear deal and to recognize Jerusalem as Israel's capital. But Israelis have expressed alarm over a series of recent decisions culminating in Syria pullout that they fear portend an American withdrawal from the region. Trump's expressed willingness to open negotiations with Iran, which nearly resulted in talks with President Hassan Rouhani, Iranian, raised fears with the U.S. would back away from tough sanctions on the Islamic Republic. Trump's refusal so far to retaliate for an attack on the Saudis' oil facilitates, which the U.S. blamed on Iran, sparked further concern. Trump abandons allies without blinking. Oops, I think I went too far there. Trump abandons allies without blinking, and Israel's liable to be next. Yet the popular Yediot Ahronot, a newspaper, said in an article earlier this week, the entire balance of power in the Middle East is built on a very delicate web of supporters, pressures, understandings, and agreements, and Trump is unraveling at the web. Rapid advances by Kurdish forces this week forced the Kurds to turn to Syrian President Bashar Assad for protection. And Syrian and Russian forces have already fanned out across the vast swaths of northeastern Syria held by the Kurds that could allow Iran, a close ally of Assad, to further expand its presence, which already stretches across the Middle East to Israel's northern frontier. The questions of the U.S. alliance came at a sensitive time for Netanyahu, who made his relations with Trump and other world leaders a major plank in his campaign ahead of last month's elections. The vote left him in deadlock with his main opponent, with no clear path either to form a government. On Wednesday, Yediot Ahronot columnist accused Netanyahu of placing all his eggs in Trump's basket, saying the American president has become a flimsy crutch. So, all those are in here. And then we have this guy. So, Japan to send its own force. It won't join U.S. coalition for the Mideast. And you gotta forgive me on these names. I'm not very good at pronouncing them. So, Japan's government said Friday it has decided not to join to a U.S. coalition to protect commercial vessels in the Middle East, but is spreading to send its own force to ensure safe shipments of oil to Japan. Chief Cabinet Secretary Suga said that Japan will keep cooperating closely with Washington even if it won't join the initiative. The U.S. says it's aimed at protecting commercial tankers from alleged Iranian attacks. Peace and stability in the Middle East is extremely important for international society, including Japan, and Suga said at a news conference, after we studied comprehensively what measures can be most effective, we have decided to pursue our own measures separately. Japan's energy needs to rely heavily on oil imports as it has kept friendly ties with Iran and is reluctant to join such a force. Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe has tried to help ease tensions between Washington and Tehran. U.S.-Iranian relations have deteriorated since President Donald Trump last year pulled out of the 2015 nuclear deal between Iran and the world powers and reimposed sanctions that deteriorated the Iranian economy. Iran has since begun breaking terms of the deal. The tensions have included seizures of oil tankers at sea. And Suga said Japan plans to deploy warships initially for information gathering purposes in the Gulf of Oman and the northern Arabian Sea and nearby waters, but did not include the Strait of Hormuz at the center of the U.S.-Iran tensions. Warships are expected to timing of dispatch hasn't been decided. Sending warships to areas of military tension, a highly sensitive issue in Japan, where its pacifist post-war constitution strictly limits use of force to the country's self-defense only. And Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, however, has gradually expanded Japan's military role. In June, a Japanese operated tanker was attacked in the Gulf of Oman, which Washington said Iran was responsible and urged Japan to join the U.S.-led military initiative. So, you've got all these guys gathered around. Israel right in the center of it. And everybody wants to say that, you know, since our parents were children and our grandparents were our age, that the world's coming to an end. Well, the world isn't going to end. It's going to start over. So, just pay attention to what's going on in the Middle East. Pay attention to this stuff. I'll sort of talk about this stuff a little bit more often, but we all got to be aware. They're staging over there. The ceasefire is just, a piece of paper. I honestly didn't think Erdogan was going to abide by it whatsoever. I'm surprised I don't even think he made it a day. But just pay attention to what's going on over there. And I'll continue to put articles up, and you may not agree where I get the information from, but I'm going to give you information from everywhere. You got to understand that some of these people have the news, but they also are biased and they don't like the current president, so they're going to bash him as well. So just keep in mind, this is what's going on. I put this map up here so you can see the kingdoms and their locations and where Israel is in the middle, and all of these are getting involved, and Israel in the middle. And it is in the scriptures that when you see Israel surrounded by its enemies, you'll know that the time is near. So you guys just keep paying attention. I'm going to keep doing these little by little, and leaving the phone lines open if you guys decide you want to talk. Then you can call in and we can have a discussion about these things. You can bring news articles, go to the page, and send emails, send them in messages, and I'll look at them and then we can discuss them. Other than that, I'm going to sign off for today. You guys have a good afternoon or a good evening. I hope you enjoyed your Sabbath for those that keep it. And just keep on keeping on, guys.